So the beauty of this session, it might give you a little PTSD from the other night when people were trapped on airplanes for hours because of lightning. But lightning's supposed to be quick, and although, again, it's the usual disclaimer, we could listen to these guys all day long, but they don't have all day long, unfortunately. And so we're going to get right to it to talk about, just the changing work environment. I don't have to tell you how COVID just threw us upside down, and Nick just let you know what the workforce development needs are in Homeland Security. But our first speaker is really special to us because she came all the way from England. She is the director of CREST at Lancaster University. She is building an international network with us. And here to talk to you about that is Stacey Conchie. Stacey?
Thank you. Okay, I can hear me, as somebody said previously, so hopefully you can. Thanks, Erin. You shaved a couple of minutes off the presentation, so we should get there in 8 minutes. So what I'd like to do over the next 8 minutes that we have is to just share some of the work that Gina, Pete, and I have been involved in terms of developing an international academic hub or network for those academics interested in the study of terrorism and violent prevention. There are many benefits to international hubs or networks, and I'm sure I don't have to sell the idea to you in the room, but I'll just name 3 benefits that we will see through these types of initiatives. One of them is around efficiency, so it allows us to pool resources and avoid duplication where duplication is not needed nor beneficial. And this speaks very much to the point by the keynote that we've just listened to about the reduction of resources in this space. Second one is very much about learning and capability building. So it provides a space for academics and government folk to be able to connect with each other, to share knowledge, skills, and hopefully to pool their skill sets to be able to work on shared projects which help us advance our learning. The third one is around capacity building. And there's only so much that we can each achieve as an individual country, but we can achieve much more if we work together on an international level. The International Hub is called the International Academic Partnerships for Science and Security, or IAPS for short. The 3 areas of activity that we have are very much around fostering stronger relationships between academics across the 5 Eyes and beyond. Also to facilitate the exchange of knowledge and methodology across academics from different countries. And also an issue which is very close to Gina, Pete, and my heart is around the development of the next generation of leaders. So the next generation of early career researchers, because let's face it, they're our future. In terms of activity to date, we held our inaugural meeting in London in March. We had 62 attendees, and these were both academics and government officials. And we had representation from 12 countries, so across the 5 Eyes and a number of European countries, as shown on the map. Apologies if it's not very clear. And we also had 17 academic centres of excellence represented or equivalents. We didn't aim for a massive meeting because we wanted to get involved in some of the meat, and that's often not possible when you have hundreds and hundreds of people at these events. What we did across 2 days is we did lots of brainstorming, used lots of sticky notes, we had very few presentations, we had no PowerPoints, and we left the meeting with a set of shared research challenges or themes that people from the different countries were working on, and we saw overlap. And we also had a number of new connections, so there was plenty of opportunity for people to network with each other. One of the other things that we learned unrelated is how to detach a sticky note from a pad and make sure that it still retains its stickiness. So if you'd like a demo, come and see us during the break and we can show you how you achieve that. So some of these shared research themes that we identified are listed here, and the list is slightly longer than what we have. And unsurprisingly, you will see that there is overlap between some items in this list and the presentations that we've heard across the 2 days that we've been at ENVISION. So we had individuals or groups interested in disinformation, and here we discussed very much the need to build resilience in this space. We talked about new and emerging threats, and this is the need to build structure to identify and prioritize threats which actually pose a realistic risk of harm. So it's very much how do we disentangle signals from the noise. We also talked about tech, so they're used by malign actors, but also ways that they can be used to leverage our efforts to advance in this space. So again, it very much touches on a topic or a comment that was raised by the keynote. We also talked about youth radicalisation and the fact that this is on the increase, and it's really alarming the different ways in which youths are being radicalised. And then we talked about some of the logistics or the practicalities, and the big one that came up, which you won't be surprised by, is the importance of data. So data is the lifeline of academics, and we need that to advance our understanding and knowledge. And there was very much a shared consensus that we need to maybe try and do more to see if we can share data between countries in a way that's ethical. And we talked about some of the limitations that we have with data that currently exist. And again, it touches very much on issues that we've heard across the 2 days in terms of data quality. At the meeting, we committed to publishing an IAPS magazine, and this will be a magazine which is written by academics, for academics, but more so for end users, so for government individuals, be the policy professionals or practitioners. And essentially, we will have contributions from academics from different countries who will write on a certain topic in a non-academic way, but importantly, they will pull out the so what. So what? Why should government officials be interested in this research? And how can it be actionable? So how can they implement that in their everyday decision-making and operations? We also had interest from those in the room in developing innovation-fora, or I often call them communities of interest. So these essentially are deep dives on a certain topic where we start to get a little bit deeper in terms of what are the real challenges, what are the barriers to being able to address these challenges, and are the different ways we can think about these challenges to help us progress this field even further. Some of the suggested fora I've listed here, for sake of time, I'm not going to read them out. The list is not exhaustive. What was encouraging for us is that people that suggested these areas of interest were not all based in the US or the UK. So we had people in Australia said they would be interested to lead a fora, in Canada, and also in Germany. So we are starting to see buy-in across the different parties in terms of making this work and making IAPS a success. We will have a 2025 meeting, as Gina mentioned. We're not yet sure where that will be. We know where it may be, but we should be able to confirm this in the autumn or the fall. So watch this space for more information. In terms of our commitments to the development of early career researchers, we had a number of initiatives since we started. We were very fortunate to be able to send 6 early career researchers to Canada's Mega Week. And Brett and Jill will probably correct me if I'm wrong, but Mega Week typically attracts 300 plus professionals, academics and practitioners working in this space. And I think this year you probably topped around 400 delegates. Yes, okay. It's a fantastic opportunity in space for anybody interested in this area in prevention, especially for early career researchers to be able to gain the latest knowledge in this space and importantly to network and build those connections. And here I've just given some feedback that we received from one of the ECRs that we were able to fund. We've also issued small grants to support professional development, typically in building connections and networking and knowledge acquisition. One thing I should have pointed out is in brackets I've listed countries. They're the countries that the ECR was affiliated with, again to show how we are trying to support different countries and not just the UK and the USA. We also have an ECR seminar series which takes place online every other month. So a few weeks ago, we heard from one ECR who shared their research and perhaps more importantly, the new methodology that they've developed in how to study the relationship between conspiracy theories and far-right groups. We also have another seminar, again online, and it's open to all ECRs, which will look at the translation of research to end users. So academics were often taught how to write an academic paper, but we're not taught how to communicate with government individuals. So what this workshop or seminar will do is to share with you some of the top tips Also, there will be opportunity outside of the seminar for ECRs to submit a piece of writing or a summary of their work, which will be looked at by one of the translation experts that we have at CREST, and they will provide feedback in terms of how to shape that piece so that it lands with government individuals in a way that they see is actionable. Now, maybe I'm biased, but if I was an ECR, I would jump at that opportunity in terms of receiving that valuable feedback, because it's not readily available, and it's certainly not something that academic institutions just offer most of their ECRs. In terms of moving forwards, we will continue to work with the ECR community. So for me, there's nothing worse than a non-ECR person telling an ECR what it is that they need. So Gina, Pete, and I can help guide and mentor and identify areas that they may not have thought about. But we very much will work with ECRs in terms of ensuring we are meeting their needs today, and helping them to develop leadership skills as well in terms of developing the programme. Initially, we'll probably work with Kelly, who I know was successful in receiving some funding from us. I can't see Kelly in the room. But I think Kelly has big ideas, which is great. And I think the comment I gave to Kelly is, it's easier to tame a wild idea than it is to add excitement to a dull idea. So all I would say is watch this space, and we are really excited with what we will achieve with the ECR programme. And just to conclude, IAPS will continue to evolve as we continue to work with different centres of excellence, and we try to support different initiatives which are suggested to us. So all I would say is watch this space. Please reach out to us. There is an email address on the next slide, but we will be here during the reception, so please do approach Gina, Pete, or I if you have any questions that we can't address on the panel, or you have any ideas of how we can continue to develop the international network. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacey. Bob Harkins is next, senior lecturer at SDSU in the nation's first Homeland Security Master's Program. Thanks for coming to Omaha, Bob.
Thank you very much. Excited to be here. My remarks today are about our most important asset, our students. And I just want to take a step back 2 days ago and the ribbon cutting ceremony. Just wonderful space there at NCITE. And speaking with the students, it's wonderful to see their work. And it's so important to me, it's so important to our program to focus on the students. And just so classy to have the students cut that ribbon. I thought that was an exciting event to watch and to see, and for those students. I started with our program last August, and along the way I've just been blessed by the founder of our program, Dr. Eric Frost. Some of you may know Eric. He just dedicated so much of his time and life to our students, and you know, I really, really appreciate his efforts, and he's just a wonderful mentor for me. Additionally, my colleague and mentor, Dr. Lance Larson, another wonderful colleague, and just so helpful with our alumni, 526 alumni that are in, I think, about 105 different disciplines. Let's see if I can get this to advance. Red button? There we go. Whoop, can I go back? Cool. So that's the outside of our conference center. So 2004, and about 20 years worth of alumni working in 500 different city, county, and state branches of government and private sector. It's just a phenomenal opportunity for our students to get out and engage. And really in educating the students, and in my perspective, and I think Dr. Larson and Dr. Frost will appreciate this, not as much about learning, and certainly there's learning and teaching involved, but it's about engaging the students in discoveries. And it's really important that we do that, and I think to speak to Dr. Rasmussen's third point especially, that's important with where we're at today in teaching our students. And what we wanted to do this year, and I think we had good success in that, and some of these statistics I'll share with you are quite stunning. We wanted to focus on fentanyl along the way with educating our students. and particularly in our area, San Diego, rather dramatic in our numbers there. And we wanted to talk to the students and bring in practitioners to explain to them what life is like, especially now. The numbers are really so dramatic, and we've seen this before, mainstream media. Over 100,000 deaths passing of Americans in the last few years is entirely unacceptable. And, what are we doing about that, at the very basic ground level? And what does it look like to educate along those terms? So we brought practitioners in. We wanted them to meet and discuss with practitioners what it means to do that job today. In San Diego County alone, we had 2 back-to-back years of over 800 people that have passed from fentanyl poisonings and fentanyl overdoses. Again, unacceptable. And what does it mean to look at that? And that's a daunting task. I mean, it really is a convergence of many different disciplines to try to attack this and along the way teach our students about the proper approach. And we brought in the Border Patrol teams, BORTAC and BORSTAR, search and rescue and tactical response teams. And what was interesting in their discussions with our students, and maybe you're not aware of this as well, suicides are up amongst Border Patrol, and why is that? What are they looking at every day, on our borderlines? And having that honest conversation with our students, I think, is very important. As I'll say to my students, we're about ready to walk down the hallway, pass that baton to you, and you're the next generation of professionals. What does it look like, and what can you expect in the various disciplines? The intent was to work with NCITE, and we're so proud and honored to be partnered with NCITE. Dr. Ligon and her team and colleagues, the NCITE research is just amazing. And Dr. Larson and I put together, along with 7 practitioners, end of the year webinar, and this was in May. And Dr. Ligon provided the opening remarks for that, and thank you for that. And as she mentioned, we had over 600 attendees in that, very important and just a wonderful outreach. What was interesting about that is what we were able to do is talk about upstream, midstream, and downstream approaches to what it looks like out there in the field and going after fentanyl smuggling, fentanyl trafficking, and dealing with the fentanyl overdoses, the fentanyl poisonings. So our first and our keynote was Patrol Agent Lopez, and he runs and is in charge of the intelligence branch in the San Diego sector. And he just had a stunning statistic that you can see there. Since 2020, about a 355% increase in fentanyl seized, and of that, 64% seized within the U.S. is coming through entering through the San Diego port of entry. So what are we doing about that? Definitely a key point for our students to consider as they get ready to walk through that Homeland Security career door. Border Patrol further learned, so we want to dive into this and what does that mean, especially for San Diego and our port of entry. Who is responsible for this? Well, we realize that there are Mexican cartels that are part of this. They're compartmentalized. They're controlling criminal activities within their respective territories, directly engaged in the distribution within prisons, outside of the prisons, and in our streets. And what does it look like from an enforcement perspective, and how do we tackle that? And we talked to our students about what that means through this webinar and through the attendees as well. This was a very interesting point, and this was our colleague from the Department of Homeland Security. And law enforcement wasn't necessarily poised for this problem, and that's definitely an honest assessment. So what does it look like, and what we're prepared to do? And it's exactly what NCITE and what we've talked about here is just the partnerships and the engagement, bringing people together. It's not one thread; it's multiple threads. To make that stronger rope where we can attack this together, and what it means to understand this new epidemic, and where do we go from here? So I thought that was a very honest assessment from DHS concerning our approach to tackle this. This will be something that we'll look at a little bit more next year, but this is a really unique aspect, especially in our region and in our border region. San Diego State University has a campus in Calexico or Imperial Valley, California, right on the border. So we have students that traverse that border daily going to and from school. And, what does it mean to educate in that area? We want to try to bring up and improve socioeconomic and economic and educational opportunities there. But certainly considering what we're at with fentanyl and what might be that next trend, it's very important to build out that model and discuss with academics, the criminologist that I have here, good friend Dr. Jeffrey Osborne, spoke in that webinar, and very unique opportunity for us to even extend the look at this into next year, and we'll highlight this with Gina and her team, and really engage those students in that perspective and that unique paradigm there of try to isolate the educational opportunities, the situation there at the border, what it means to educate those students there, and then talk with practitioners that are on the ground and just say, hey, what is going on and what can you tell us and our students about what you're doing to make them an effective new partner in Homeland Security. Lastly, the top photo is the conference center where I instruct. And in the fentanyl webinar, we had 2 polls, and thank you for NCITE for helping us with those polls and what they should specify. So the first one is 85% of our attendees believe that fentanyl should be classified as a weapon of mass destruction. This was driven by a student poster from last year, and we really took it and ran with that this year with our focus on fentanyl and Homeland Security, and that was by student Jeffrey Vargas. And that is definitely a point of contention, and it's definitely a debate amongst a military perspective as well as in a law enforcement perspective. But again, as I mentioned in my opening remark, 100,000 deaths is too much not to take notice. And what are we going to do effectively to do that? One area to look at would be to reclassify that or classify fentanyl as a weapon of mass destruction. Interesting on that point, Border Patrol Agent Lopez said, for every action, there's a reaction, right? So we need to take a look at that second action that may be as a result of classifying fentanyl as a WMD, and then be taking a look at Mexico and the cartels themselves. So you take a look at a cartel and you might say, okay, now they're responsible for some terrorist activities. What does that mean for the border and the increase in immigration and that influx of people at the border that might be a direct result of that WMD classification? The second poll that we ran was 59% of our attendees thought that, and I think this is a very important part because it's really an overlap and layered opportunity to teach and expand what we have out there in terms of knowledge, and that's looking at our youth education. We have to talk to our youth, we have to talk to our parents, educate not only our students, but beyond that in the community. So with that, I will leave my remarks, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Bob. Matt Crane has been to Omaha before to present on his work. We're happy to have him back again. He's an IO psychologist at SUNY Albany. Matt, you're going to tell us how to be resilient.
I'm going to try my best. Thanks, everyone, and good afternoon. So I'm presenting the research today on behalf of myself, my co-PI, Neil Shortland at the University of Massachusetts Lowell, and our research assistant, Jen Mezapel, who's sitting here in the room. So this project kind of dovetails really nicely, I think, off of Director Rasmussen's comments during his keynote on the issue of trauma and psychological impacts from the work that terrorism researchers, counterterrorism professionals do and the material that they encounter in their daily jobs. When you think about frontline occupations that have a risk of trauma and harm, you might think of the military, right? You might think of police, EMTs, frontline healthcare professionals. Very rarely do we think about academics as being on the front lines of anything. But the work that counterterrorism professionals, targeted violence professionals, researchers in this space are doing is real and exposed to very serious, very significant, potentially very damaging content on a regular basis. And so the work that we're going to talk about here is 2 phases of work that we did over the last 2 years with many of the people in this room, by the way. So thank you all if you participated in this research in any way. We're very appreciative of the work that you did to try to get a perspective on both what the typical job experiences are for terrorism and targeted violence prevention researchers, as well as what those experiences and exposures are like on an intimate day-to-day basis. And so we did this in 2 different phases. So the first phase of work was fully qualitative and job analytic. Job analysis is a organizational psychology technique to try to break down the fundamental contributing factors that make up an occupation, right? What are the knowledge, skills, and abilities necessary to do the job? And also, what are your typical experiences like? What do you usually encounter? And what do those encounters mean for you personally, socially, developmentally? So that was 35 interviews, over 50 hours of interviews with different folks in the US and the UK across different occupation titles and research interests, as well as ranks and seniority, which will become something that is an important trend that we'll talk about later on. And we used those interview transcripts, very detailed job analytic interview transcripts, which in our first phase 1 report from last year, you can find really deep analysis of that content, as well as the full interview protocol in the back of that report that's available on the NCITE website. We then followed that this year with what's called an experience sampling study. And experience sampling is a form of very intense longitudinal research where you are having participants report on, in our case, daily events. So we followed 11 terrorism researchers on a day-to-day basis for a month and had them report every single day following a baseline survey that collected a lot of demographic and kind of baseline psychological data on them. We had to report every day on whether or not they were exposed to distressing or violent or traumatic material, how many exposures they had, the form and function of those exposures, got lots of really detailed information about that, and then tracked the trends in their personal psychological impact and experiences over that 1 month of working together. So let's walk through some of the kind of key takeaways from both of those phases of research. The bottom line up front from phase 1 in the qualitative portion of this work is that there is a very significant and meaningful delta between how people in this room and in this field talk about how this impacts them and how it actually does, right? The first big takeaway there, right? There's an underestimation of the psychological toll that doing this research and working in this space has on people. A really interesting phenomenon. If we, of the 35 people that we interviewed, if we asked them a question of, to what extent do you feel like you are distressed or harmed by the work that you do on a day-to-day basis? Almost 0 people would say that they were. They'd say, it's not a big deal. It can get hard sometimes, but it's not a big problem. But if you ask a slightly different question, which is, what is the behavioral impact to you? How has it changed your life? Everyone has a story about what they do differently that is an outcome of what they do. If you're changing your life in response to your work, that's a trauma response. Every clinical psychologist will tell you that, right? So that's an important trend. We also found that there are pervasive cultural issues in the discipline that might make trauma mitigation harder. One of them, and I encourage you to go outside and look at Jen's great poster that covers some of these things as well. One of them is an issue of kind of like competition and bravado in the way that these things are. There is a competitive exposure process. Go to a conference and somebody says, hey, did you see this execution video that somebody posted on Telegram? Perhaps it's in a discipline that you don't even work in, and now you're going to seek it out because you want to be part of the community that can say that they've seen these things. That is culturally normative, but potentially very psychologically damaging. And another trend that we didn't expect, but has become very robust and is also the subject of the poster outside, is it seems like there are some social identity differences here. We found across our work that women, racial and ethnic minorities, people from the LGBTQ community tended to report more exposures to traumatic content, more significant impacts to themselves, and longer lasting harm. And our working theory on this is because many of these people work on extremists that attack people that look like them. And you go into the work thinking that you're going to be this stoic academic with your training and your perspective, and you see yourself reflected in the exercise of terrorism and targeted violence in a way that you don't expect. So here are just a few quotations, and again, most of these are in our report. More of them are in the report as well, so I won't read through them. But if you read over some of these, you'll see really profound impacts to people's lives, their behaviors, their psychology, and their view of the field in how they experience this stuff. We have undergraduate students saying that they have felt so unsafe after doing their research that they've had to move homes. We've had people say that they no longer take public transit or can go into a crowded event or have to sit in every restaurant with their bodies facing, their faces facing a door in every exit so they can see where the threats are going to come from, even though they know that the likelihood of an attack or the likelihood of that experience is so infinitesimal. And if you ask people about what the field can do or their optimism or their perspective on the field, it's a challenge, right? That first quote at the top there, it's hard to be optimistic, it's hard to be hopeful, right? This is grim content that we're all working on, and we go into that acknowledging that, but there is there's a way to create, or there has to be a way to create an environment that is supportive and productive for people who are doing hard things. And this is institutional in many cases. One of the respondents there on the bottom left, that quote is talking about the fact that universities and institutions do everything to support participants, right? IRB is there to protect your participants and the people that you work with, but never has anything to say about researchers or protections for the people that are actually doing the research. And we find, again, a rank difference amongst people where junior scholars are put in a bad position relative to PIs, which I'll go over very quickly because I want to make sure that I manage time well here for my fellow panelists. So this is some of the key takeaways and a brief graph that I will explain from our experience sampling study, but here's the bottom line here. What we found in experience sampling was that rates of traumatic exposure generally varied among people, but desensitization across the population may be a serious and pervasive problem. We did reinforce some of the gender and identity trends that we found in the qualitative research, which I'll talk about. But just in general, across all of our observations, about 30% of daily observations across participants had at least one traumatic exposure. So 30% of the time, you're having at least one experience that you are personally identifying as traumatic or distressing. That reporting was significantly greater amongst women. So female respondents reported significantly more exposures than men. They also reported reliving those experiences more often than their male counterparts. They had lower baseline and then lower overtime job satisfaction and higher rates of intentional turnover intention, right? So day in, day out, they're thinking more and more about leaving the profession in general. Then these rates of exposure varied by rank. So the more junior you were, the more frequently you stated that you saw a traumatic event, the more often you said that you would relive it, and the more impactful it seemed to you. And that was undergraduates significantly more than postdocs and grad students and PIs. Grad students and postdocs, more significant than PIs. PIs are not really reporting the trauma in this stuff. And there's questions about why that might be, but it's probably because the work cascades from the top down, and the people on the lower ranks are seeing the worst things. They're getting the most exposure. They're getting the most firsthand content in that space. And it generally underscores this thing of desensitization, which we actually did not expect, and that's what this graph is showing here. I expected that daily exposures, the more frequent your exposures to violent content and traumatic material would be over the course of your time, that it would increase, aggregate on your perspective of impact and things like that. We actually found across the board that was the exact opposite. So people who had more exposures and reported more exposures, significantly more than others, over time reported more significant decreases in their perspective of the impact of an individual exposure on them. They're giving up, right? They're desensitizing. They're saying that this is, I just have to kind of get through it. We talk a lot about desensitization in general as a strategy or as a thing that people who work in these spaces should do. The clinical work on desensitization is very clear that desensitization is not a healthy psychological strategy. And that's actually my last point on the key takeaways here about desensitization not being a panacea. It's not good to be desensitized, right? It shows that you have a real structural problem with managing the experiences that you're having, where your psychology just has to intervene and prevent your emotion from being impacted there. But so just to summarize some additional key takeaways here, very important to recognize that the lived experiences of researchers is imbued with psychosocial harm. This is a problem for the researchers, but it's also a problem for the field because people are leaving this discipline because of these things, and they're not going to join if they have frequent traumatic experiences. So if we want counterterrorism, terrorism prevention to be a healthy field, robust with people in it, we need to solve these problems. It's also likely that who is exposed to these materials is probably more important than what they're exposed to or how those exposures manifest. So more research needs to be done on the intersections of identity and experience. So I hope I wasn't too far over time, and thank you all. Welcome your questions for later. Thanks.
Thank you, Matt. Next up is Dr. Karyn Sporer from the University of Maine. She is a criminologist, and she's going to talk to us about what practitioners need to know about supporting families. Take it away, Karyn.
Thank you. I'm just laughing because that was me talking about the IRB in that interview, but, hot take, Karyn. Thank you to NCITE and DHS for funding this research. This week wraps up 4 years of doing this work. It's been a really great honor. So I'm not gonna, I started kind of at the baseline, but community prevention is incredibly important. Some of the world's most powerful agencies rely on the community to be engaged when it comes to reporting suspicious behavior, preventing at all stages of the radicalization process. And I was saying in 9.5 minutes, but I have about 5 minutes, I think. I'm going to talk about the role that family members play in prevention. And I really do argue that families, while friends see much with radicalization, I do think family members are kind of the starting point, the ground floor for community prevention. So my overall goal 4 years ago was to understand how families make sense of the radicalization process and then the barriers that they face to reporting suspicious behaviors. And as I was communicating with families, I'll talk about that on the next slide, it kind of became more apparent that it's not as simple as that. Because families are involved, they are engaged, they just aren't really sure what they're observing. And that's sort of what I'm going to be talking about today, and that they're lacking the resources to be engaged in an effective and efficient way. So today, very quickly, what do practitioners need to know to support the families of violent extremists? And for me, practitioners aren't just those who are working in the field, but I'm talking about social workers, psychologists, therapists, right, teachers. Those are the people that I'll be talking about today. So 3.5 years ago, I started doing interviews. I started talking to the family members of people who radicalized. This is full radicalization, no false positives. So any questions about that, we can talk about later over drinks. But every single person radicalized, the majority mobilized to violence. A lot of them are dead now, are in prison, or have desisted. I spoke to parents, siblings, in-laws, intimate partners, the children of extremists. I have over 68 hours of data. These were really exhausting conversations. I really unloaded on the people who I had that interview with. Everyone wanted to tell their story. I've been talking to marginalized and victimized populations for I think 15 years now. This was by far the most difficult. And even before we talked about terrorism and violence, I talked to everyone about their childhoods. Where did they come from? What were their families like? And then, of course, how terrorism and extremism really shockingly and unexpectedly became a part of their lives. It was, for them, pretty unpredictable. So for their lives, for my participants and the people who radicalized, their lives were very difficult. There's a lot of intergenerational trauma, polyvictimization, a lot of violence. For those who did radicalize, and their family members are reflecting on this, these are some non-ideological risk factors, but almost every single person who radicalized experienced one or more adverse childhood experiences, conduct problems, all these issues. So interactions with police, neglect, acute sexual abuse, everything that you read about as a criminologist and a victimologist was there, and very vivid. But also their families, right? These were not the most comfortable in safe environments where these children and these kids are being raised who subsequently radicalized. A lot of family-level instabilities, substance use, a lot of domestic violence, and not just witnessing domestic violence, but also the aftermath, which can also be just as traumatic for young kids as experiencing violence in person. I'm going really fast, so sorry. So the lesson number one is that violent extremists at the center of my study, right, not generalizable, and their family members experienced acute personal, environmental, and social traumas. So if we do any policy implications, right, we really have to think about that. The radicalization stories included also, like almost every indicator or sign of radicalization in the literature. So if you look at the NCTC, like the mobilization content, like they're talking about all of those things. These family members are seeing all of those indicators all the time. I'm gonna read a couple quotes from my participants. All right, so this is a mother talking. She said, there was a point where he was really wanting us to convert. He really wanted us to convert, and he had one girlfriend for years and years. He wanted her to convert. She said, this isn't for me. Then he ended that relationship because of that. It's very sweet. So towards the end of his radicalization process, that started happening. This is a father who, his son converted. He went to the mosque. He was very concerned, but didn't really know what he was observing. So he said, I went to the mosque, spoke to the imam. They gave us a tour. He was downstairs, and my son was away from us. And he said, I noticed your son's enthusiasm in class. I don't know him very well, but I noticed his enthusiasm, and it concerns me. I'm sure you've noticed his drastic change in clothing. And I said, yes. And he goes, that concerns me too. My friends at the mosque are concerned about him because he's harsh and judgmental. Third quote from another father, he started changing himself, totally different. He was changing his name, his clothing, right? He was a completely different person. Everything's changing about you. So these indicators, right, we know, and again, I love the NCTC output where you talk about how these are constitutionally protected activities, right? But for these people, they're signs of something worse, right? Something malevolent, and that they were indicative of a violent radicalization that was happening in their homes. These are periods of high stress for families. I feel like, was there a slide I'm missing? No, okay. So period of high stress for families, they don't understand what's happening, even though they're seeing all these indicators. And just about half of my participants either had absolutely no understanding of what was going on at home, or they didn't understand the severity of this radicalization process. So one mom said, I didn't know what extremism was. I didn't know what radical was. If you'd asked me those questions before, I would have said, huh? A second mother said, I mean, we didn't realize how serious it had become until the moment the FBI showed up, right, at their door, right, and at home. So really shocking. They had concerns, right, but they did not know how severe it was. So the second lesson, just based on that, is that family members are observing many indicators, but the majority either don't understand what they're seeing or they didn't appreciate the severity. And what I've learned from these conversations was not that the family members didn't want to report suspicious activity. Like they're not going to call the FBI, right? Some might, but most don't. And they didn't not want to intervene, they just didn't know how, or really what the problem was. So for many, their intervention attempts were too little and too late. So, perfect. So what do practitioners need to know based on these two lessons to support families of homegrown violent extremists? The first is that, based on the first part of the talk, families need access to trauma-informed care before and after radicalization. One thing I haven't even talked on today is the stigma of having a child or a partner or a parent who's radicalized. They lose friendships, they've lost therapists, right? They lose everybody around them. They're demonized in their communities. But also, like we know, arrest and incarceration is really important, right, for late-stage planning, mobilization, but this research highlights the need for earlier trauma-informed care, a public health approach to dealing with youth in particular who are at risk of radicalization. And second and last is that families need access to quality material and knowledge and support. So these family members are observing, again, every indicator, they're observing risk factors, but they're not aware that what they're seeing is radicalization, right? So combined with a general lack of awareness and also the speed at which radicalization happens, it's very, very quick, especially for young people. These informal interventions are unlikely to work very well. And when they look out or reach out for support, they need to find it. So they need qualified social workers, practitioners that are trained in radicalization and terrorism and are not afraid to get that education. I'm a former social worker. There was never one moment where I was taught about terrorism, violence, those kind of things, right? Or ideologically inspired violence. And that's it. I will talk to you for hours about this, but that's it for today.
I'm sorry we don't have more time to hear more from Karyn, because she is somebody who is so close to this issue in ways that the rest of us don't get to see. So really grateful to you, Karyn. And please take pictures of the slides with their contact information so you can reach out to them after this. In the event we will likely run out of time for Q&A. Next up is another Erin. We're just awesome. This one is Erin Bass, and she's going to talk to you about kind of a business approach to this field. I absolutely love it. It's a real fun story to get to tell.
Great.
So, Erin.
Thanks so much. Yes, super excited to share our project with all of you. I'm Erin Bass, and my co-PI, Erin Plagan-Cool-Miles, is over here, and then our wonderful graduate assistant, who really is the wheels behind this project, Kaylin Wettengale, is here as well. So the title of our project is Workforce and Professional Development, Building Capacity in HSE-Focused Business Analysis Applications. So what does that mean? So in this project, we leverage our business school curriculum. So I'm a business professor, and we develop student-centered projects that address real-time, real-world challenges for DHS end users. And I'll explain a little bit about what that process is. But why are we doing these projects in business schools? And what we found is really business students have unique knowledge, skills, and abilities that's really applicable to maybe some of the challenges that are faced, not just within government, but within HSE more proper. And so we wanted to see if we could potentially leverage those knowledge, skills, and abilities in that context and see what would happen. So how we do this is we take project-based classes, and we have DHS end users offer projects within those classes for our students to work on. And then the outcomes of our project include the student's final report to DHS. So DHS end users get to keep that report. They also provide a presentation, and then we're collecting data as good researchers do the whole entire time to find out what happens. So the process we follow the academic year. So every year in July and then again in November, we're recruiting projects from DHS end users. I will also recruit projects now if there's any end users who think that this might be something that's up your alley. But we recruit projects and we just say, hey, we've got a course coming up. Would you be interested in providing a project with us? And then we will meet and consult and scope the work so that it will work within our class. Then once the class starts, we offer the project alongside a lot of other projects too. So not all of the projects in the class are DHS end user projects. We'll have projects from startups. We'll have projects from local organizations, from nonprofits, and so they're all kind of working together. And that collaboration is really cool because all of these different contexts are all working on projects all at the same time. Students work on the projects in teams over the course of the semester, and then they present their final work. So actually in like 3 hours, I'm going to be listening to some of these projects for my MBA capstone class that's happening tonight. To date, we've been a part of NCITE for 4 years. So to date, we've completed 48 of these projects with 785 students that have been impacted. And then you can see some of the end user project clients that we've had. And the cool thing is that pretty much any DHS end user we'll have a project that will fit into our class. It's super flexible because basically any kind of productivity, efficiency, recruiting, retention, any kind of business sort of angle we can fit into this class. So we've been fortunate to work with a lot of different DHS end users, and hopefully we'll continue working with those and more. So I wanted to highlight just one project to share with all of you today. This was a project that we completed for CISA, and we had MBA students complete this project in 2 different classes. So what ended up happening is we had a group that worked on this in the fall 2023, and they did such a great job that CISA came back to us and said, hey, now we want to see if you can apply it in this, so can we do like a tag-along project, which we do those too. And so we had a different group of students who worked on this project in 2024, and you can see I pulled the slide of the spring 2024 students up here who were the consultants on this project. So the project objective was to equip CISA with a calculator and user guide to evaluate the financial impact of bomb threats on the retail sector. So essentially when they're doing training with a Walmart, CISA wanted to be able to communicate to Walmart, this is the cost of shutting down, evacuating a Walmart at any given time. And so how can we calculate that and show our, like in the retail sector, what that would cost a Walmart or a Walgreens or whatever. So this is hard to see, but the students got really excited with Excel. And you can see all the tabs down there. They built this wonderful calculator that just required CISA to input in this column. They just had to input some key things, so like how much square footage is it? What is the typical revenue, right? Like things that any Walmart or Walgreens or whoever would know these data, and put that in there, and then it would populate so that they would be able to share that. They also developed a user guide so that anyone at CISA who wanted to be able to use this, they could follow along the steps of how to do it. So I think it was a really great example of students knowing how to do some of these estimates, knowing how to work in Excel, and being able to produce a product that is then usable for a DHS end user. And according to our friends at CISA, they told us that they were able to use it the very next day, which was really exciting for us and for our students, because then the students know that they're making an impact too. So speaking of impact, we always ask the students what their familiarity is with the Homeland Security enterprise. Because keep in mind, these are MBA students, or these are our data analytics students, and most of them probably think that they're going to go and work in industry like Union Pacific or Mutual of Omaha. They might not necessarily think about a career in the Homeland Security enterprise. So the light gray is the response. This is just from year 3 and 4. So the light gray is the response of how familiar they are with the Homeland Security enterprise at the beginning of the class. And you can see the data are heavily skewed toward not familiar at all. By the end of the class, it definitely evens out. And what I want to call your attention on is that difference between not familiar at all at the beginning of the class and at the end of the class. And we're able to make these differences in a short 8 weeks. So when you start to think about how we can transform the workforce, just by being able to expose these students to some HSE problems and have them work on it for 8 weeks, we can see a huge difference not only in their familiarity, but the other thing that we collect from them is how likely they would be to pursue a career in the Homeland Security enterprise. And that changes very similarly from these high, I don't think my knowledge, skills, and abilities are applicable at all, to I see huge applicability for my knowledge, skills, and abilities that I gain in a business school for the Homeland Security enterprise. So next steps for our project are to actually build out that pathway. We know that students are more familiar now. We know that they know that their knowledge, skills, and abilities are relevant. And so how do we build that pathway so that we see more business students enter into these careers? That's it.
Okay, our final presenters, you get a twofer. we have David Schanzer of Duke University and Daveed Gartenstein-Ross of Valens Gaming, who are going to talk about using war games and simulations in training, and what a cool way to end the session. So I invite you either or both, or I have another one.
Thank you. How are you all doing? Oh, it's okay. I'm not. You can put them up, but I'm not going to be briefing off of them. It's great to join you. So I first became interested in games as an educational tool when I was teaching at Georgetown University about a decade ago. What I realized is that the students I had there were looking for something that was much more tactile and immersive. And so I started to build some simple games for my class. And quickly it became one of the more popular classes in the security studies program. But I realized that games can access something that discussions can't. Right? All of us understand what a classroom discussion is like, and nobody here will diminish their value. But it's something entirely different for those of you who've gone from academia to being practitioners, or maybe back and forth between them, to actually deal with a problem rather than discussing a problem. There's so many dimensions you normally don't access, so much information that's very unclear, and games can replicate this. So over time, from those very early simple games, I started to develop a theory of what makes for a good game. We call our style of game immersive exercise. And I think that there's more that can be done with games in education. They should replicate, for one thing, I think that having a strong information environment that's built around a coherent world is important, right? I've played so many different games where you scratch the surface of the game and it falls apart because everything's obvious. I don't understand when I'm playing a game or a simulation and I can read a newspaper article that's replicated and understand from it exactly what's going on in the world. That's not how the world works. Those of you who understand our polarized media environment understand that it's hard to get to the bottom of what's happening in a single story until you've read 3 or 4 or 5 articles. There's so much that is missing or unclear or where sources tend to differ. Having a good information environment, having a well-built world, these are very important and replicate the kind of world that we all dwell in. We as humans are also storytelling creatures. I think having a narrative arc to a game is important. There's other aspects to what I think makes for a good game, but I was fortunate to be able to have NCITE fund this study with my colleague David Schanzer and also Jessica Sperling at Duke University. What it looks at is a game that I call Acceleration. It's a Homeland Security-focused game that really is looking at fault lines within and between civilizations. It features a white nationalist takeover of a town in Northern California. It features the US government and also European countries dealing with a migration crisis. You'll remember Nick Rasmussen talking about the intersection of migration with different patterns in terrorism. And people have to step into role and deal with this over the course of a 7 or an 8-week class. I'm really excited about this project because having seen games used in education, one thing that I'm very familiar with is studies that say, yes, games are useful, but when you look at how they get to the conclusion that games are useful, it's usually simply self-reported from students. Now, that's not nothing. That's something. But what I was really happy to be able to do was to put together, to work with colleagues, including a methodologist in education, Jessica Sperling, to look at the question of, can we objectively show what the impact of games in education is? And there's a lot from that which Professor Schanzer will present next. But my bottom line here is that there's a lot that we can access and a lot of skills that normally aren't taught that can come from games. This is looking at one aspect, which is education, but there are so many other aspects of games that can be useful to all of us, from training to novel analytic insights, to stepping in to understand crisis response. And this is something I'm passionate about and would love to talk to anybody here about once we're done with this very packed panel. Professor Schanzer, would you like to present on our study?
Okay. So these are the slides, Daveed. Oops. So our project is basically to try to assess the benefits that students gain from participating in one of these games that Daveed discussed. So we're doing 2 iterations of the game. We just finished one this spring semester, and we're doing it again in the fall. So to do this, we need the coordination between the university and Valens Global because as a single professor, you can't run a game. That is a lot. So the company, which we're paying for, so it's an expensive endeavor, and we're very grateful for NCITE for funding it for these 2 iterations. Yeah, there's a lot of behind-the-scenes work that is happening to make the game work. Daveed talked about his game, Acceleration. It's very fascinating. You might think, okay, so how do you take a game and make it into a course? So especially those of you do research, but I assume you all have to teach as well, right? So you know what it's like to try to teach a class. So our class time are essentially work sessions. So we have 2.5 hours. We do it in the evening. That way, fewer other distractions. We actually take over a whole building at our policy school so the students can move around. They have lots of space. They meet with their teams, they strategize, and they go negotiate with other teams. Daveed and I are there for a while. We each interact with the teams a little bit, try to poke holes in what they're doing, ask them hard questions, try to get them to think more strategically about what they're doing. And often we'll leave around 9 o'clock and they're still going. And that's always a good sign that the students are really engaged when the professors leave and they're just still getting warmed up. So that's how our classes work. How do you make it into a course where you actually have to evaluate the students and give them a grade of some sort at the end? So, of course, they participate in their weekly work sessions with their classes. Each week they develop a move, which is then assessed, and then the game moves forward depending on the moves that they make. So none of the iterations of the game will ever be the same because they all change constantly depending on what the different teams do and what the different moves are. Each student has to deliver one short strategic briefing, which is a really great experience for them to stand up in front of their team and explain what they did, why they did it, and what were the strengths and weaknesses of their move from the prior week. We require the students to do peer assessments 2 times to try to eliminate the free rider problem in all group activities. Now, they all assess each other actually quite well, but I think it's a good device to keep everybody honest. And then at the end of the class, we have them write a strategic memo that tries to get them to evaluate, again, the entire course of the game, and then give advice to their boss. If they were Russia, it was Vladimir Putin. If it was, if they were the governor of California, it would have been, of course, the governor. So they write a memo to their boss on what the strategic direction they should do going forward. And then they're evaluated. They all get goals that their team is supposed to try to advance over the course of all of their moves. And each team is evaluated based on how much they have achieved their strategic objectives. And of course, their memo is then discusses at the end what the student thinks that they should do in the future to continue to advance those goals. So you can see how between the game playing and the assignments, it's just a very different experience for the students in terms of trying to learn how to think strategically and think of second and third order effects of what they're doing. Just a little bit of information about how the class went this year and also some very preliminary data that we have. Very diverse class. I can say it's my 19th year coming up teaching at Duke. When I taught security classes at the beginning, I'd say the ratio was 3 or 4 to 1 in terms of men to women, but that has really balanced out, which is great. We mix graduate students and undergrads in these classes, which is very unique, but it's wonderful. The grad students serve in a mentorship position. They tend to love the interaction that they have with the undergrads, and a lot of our graduate students have had professional experience in the IC or the military, and the younger students are really getting a great mentor and some eye-opening in terms of career possibilities by interacting with the grad students. And you can see in the age range, you're not going to find many classes at Duke, I can only speak for Duke, where you have 18-year-olds and 34-year-olds interacting in the same class. And it really works. And we're also very happy that we're attracting not just your typical public policy and policy majors, but students from across the university and in engineering and computer science and a lot of other majors. So we're getting that kind of diversity. And the whole focus of the class, of our project is to evaluate what they're learning. And so we're collecting multiple forms of data from pre and post course surveys. We're doing post-class focus groups, and the assessors are looking very closely at the course materials that are being produced both by the students and the project team to assess learning objectives. They also did some exercises, both at the beginning and the end. Of course, we'll compare how they did on the exercises. A little bit about our outcomes. We identified 4 goals for the course: increase in national security knowledge, increase in teamwork skills, causal thinking, and perspective taking. This is just a shred of the data that we've collected, but we're seeing that the students have reported the greatest gains in national security knowledge, which was actually a surprise to us because it's not a course where we're trying to deliver content, but they're absorbing a lot of content through their working with their teams and doing the research that they need to do their moves effectively. We saw the women reporting a lot higher gains in all the different outcomes, which is fine, great. We also found that the students are reporting that the opportunity to work as a team to develop their policies is the component of the course that they believe is contributing the most to all of these different positive outcomes. Some data on how the students are reporting themselves as to how this experience is impacting them. In terms of the impact on personal development, 87%, and we're talking about a 7-week course, 87% of the students are saying that it's at least some personal development, and a third of them are saying a lot or a great deal of personal development in the course. This class helped me become more comfortable with verbal discussion, negotiation, and presentation. In other classes, I've been able to prepare, but this class requires instantaneous decision-making and response. I was nervous about exercising this skill at first, but have found it to be enjoyable. In terms of their impact on their academic interests, a little bit lower, but still 74%, at least some impact on their academic interests, and 24%, a quarter of them saying a lot or a great deal. I took this class as a fun and challenging side plot and learned so much about myself, developing strategies and different policies. Now I feel, though, I am more willing to take untraditional, slightly scary classes. So that, for us, is a great outcome, that the students are willing to take a step outside of where they're comfortable and where they think they're going to get the best grades. And frankly, that is a huge driver for the modern student. And they're willing to do something different. Finally, impact on career interest, 71%, at least some. not surprisingly, big thing, career interests, 13%, a lot or a great deal, is broaden my potential career plans. I'm considering specifically pushing to a position in security. So we really can, hopefully, begin to help drive students more towards possible careers in the Homeland Security space. Another chart just showing the different aspects of the course, really all getting extremely high remarks in terms of enjoyability, engagement, and value for the students. I'll note that the interaction with the professors seemed to rank the lowest on the of the different components, but what are you going to do? We will have a lot more results for you next year, but thank you very much.